In this video, we are going to build a simple to-do list using React. So if you remember, when we were learning HTML, CSS and JavaScript, then at that point of time, we did not know React. So simply in HTML and JavaScript, we built a simple to-do list. Right now, we'll try to build a similar application using React. And we'll see that what are the differences. So the difference will be mainly that when we earlier did something like let's say this UL is there and inside li item, let's say task 1, task 2, task 3, something like this was there, then all these tasks at that point of time we inserted it manually by iterating through down. So what we did is that we took a reference of the let's say this UL thing, and inside that we using query selector or something, and then inside that we appended child using HTML DOM APIs, and we inserted these things. Right now we'll see a much more better way, which is sort of a declarative way of doing the same thing using React. Okay, so first of all, what we are going to do is that, let's say we will maintain the whole thing, the whole list, what we are going to have, that we will maintain in a list, in a state inside our as a list inside our state, rather than manually handling it and entering it inside the DOM directly. So we can have something like this. So let's say we have constructor okay, and in this we have this dot state is equal to, let's say items, and now this items is an array, and this is an array of tasks. Okay, so this will be let's say right now just a couple of strings. So task 1 is there, and similarly let's say task 2, task 3, like that. And rather than building it, hard coding it, we are going to iterate over this dot state dot items, and then we will render it using that. So what we can do, we can simply take this dot state dot items, and then we will do a map. Every time I'm going to get an item, and on that item I'm going to render a li element. Now this li element is going to have my item. Okay, and obviously we will get a warning because key is not there, right? We'll fix that using a proper ID, but right now we know that we can simply have key is equal to, let's say simply an index of the list. Okay, so in this manner, whether you can see that just for simplicity I'm writing like this, but anyways you understand that yeah, so you understand that yeah, we are having 3 tasks here, and that's why it is being rendered as 3. If we are having 5, then automatically 5. So you can see that we just need to handle this state, and if this is state dot items, if this thing is changed, then automatically our entire rendered list will also be changed, right? So we know that this is not our target. What we wanted to do is that we have some input element, and that in input element, whatever we are adding, whatever the to do task we are adding, that should get added here. Initially this will be empty. Okay, so what we can do, we can have something like let's say a task, and then we can have some input element. Okay, and then let's say we have a button, and then let's say add task. So something like this. Initially let's say the whole list of items is empty. Now our target will be that if we add something, then what do we need to do? We don't need to bother about getting inside UL and adding that whatever manually. We simply, whenever we click on this button, we simply need to do one thing, that we need to change our state. We need to update our state with the new value, and that's it. Automatically when state will change, then automatically this thing will re-render, and that will be the behavior based on React. So rather than doing it iteratively, imperatively, we are going to do it like sort of in a declarative way, which is how React will help us in that. Okay, so just one thing, there is no space here, so let's add some space. Okay, and one more thing, so see, when we click here, then it gets highlighted, that is fine, but when we click on task, then it's not highlighted, right? And that we know that is because we can use the label element, and if we put the whole thing inside label element, then we'll see that even if we click on task, then also it is highlighted, because now HTML or React will understand that this task is a part of this input label. Okay, and again we need a space here, so we can a similar span we can write here also, and that would be okay. So now our purpose is that if I write some task 1 and I click on add task, then my state should modify. I am not now bothering about going inside UL and adding it manually. Just I need to handle my state appropriately. So for that, I'll simply do one thing, that let's say on click, I'm going to add some call some function called, let's say, add task, and this should do the trick. So let's say add task is a function, and it is a class based component, so this has to be this dot add task. Okay, now inside this we will get inside this yeah, so essentially what we need to do is that somehow we need to get this input value, right? Now we know that the easiest we can make this input controlled component or uncontrolled component. If we make this controlled component, then we need to have some value is equal to some input value, and then we can maintain that input value inside the state. Okay, other way is that we can simply make it an uncontrolled component, where I can have simply ref is equal to here some ref, and that ref can be called, let's say, input ref, and let's call it this dot input ref, and this input ref will be initialized here. Okay, so this dot input ref is equal to react dot create ref, and now this dot input ref, we can see that if we simply print the value of this dot input ref dot current dot value, then essentially we will get the value whatever we write here. So task 1 You can see that task 1 we are getting. So now whatever the value we have got, we simply have to append that in this this dot state dot items. Okay. Now how to do that? We know that we can use this dot set state. Okay, let's use the functional way of doing this. So we will get the items. Okay, and then what we are going to do? We are going to return an object with items items as items dot push this thing. So let's say task is equal to this thing. This thing is a new task, right? This thing is a new task, and all we need to do is that okay, so let's see. So if we are having task 1, okay, so is the state dot items dot map. Okay, okay, so okay, yeah, so the problem is that this items dot push returns an integer, right? So what we should do is that we can simply modify it like this, and then we do it like this, or can we? Let's see. Okay, now error is gone, but you can see that one time I clicked and then 2 items are inserted. Why is that? So in order to see that, let's see. So let's say A you are printing here and B you are printing here. Okay, and let's see what happens. So you can see that A is printed once and B is printed twice. So what is happening is that this is done internally by React to avoid doing the same mistake which we are doing right now. What React is trying to tell us that if you try to mutate some state value, so actually right now we are mutating state value. Why? Unintentionally. We thought that items is a separate variable, but that is not the case, because items is actually a reference. This dot state dot items is a reference because this is an object. This is not a primitive type 10, 20, 30 or something like that, right? This is a this is an object object data type, which means that it has a reference, and in that if you are pushing something directly in that reference, which means that unintentionally you are mutating the state directly, which you should not. Always you should use set state to mutate, right? Here even if you are using set state unintentionally, you are mutating the things, and that's why you'll see that let's say you do something like this, you will see that unintentionally one time this task 1 is there, and since this is running again, you are mutating it again. Okay, so this is what is happening. Now I'll tell you a simple way to fix that, but firstly let's see the longer way. So the idea is that, yeah, so we are mutating this directly. So can we do something like this, that we don't mutate it directly, rather we mutate a copy of it, which means that let's do something like my items. Okay, and we have to create my items from items, not by directly assigning. We'll fix that here, but you understand the point that from items you are creating a copy. We will create a copy later, but just let me complete it. That from items we are creating a copy, and we are inserting that in the copy, not the reference itself, which means that now we are not mutating the state directly. Okay, and then what we do is that my items is the one which we are going to assign it back. Now how to create the copy? There are two ways to create a copy. We know that one is shallow copy and one is deep copy. So deep copy is something like, if we do something like json dot parse json dot stringify. Okay, so this will create a deep copy. Let's see now how it works. So task 1, and now you can see that only one is added. Why? Because React is intentionally trying to re-render two times, not re-render, trying to call set state two times just to avoid any mistakes. So this will not happen. In fact, the last bug also, two times task 1, that will not happen in prod mode, production mode. It will only happen in dev mode. But that is the entire point of React, is that they are trying to do this in dev mode, so that you don't do this sort of mistakes in prod mode, so that this sort of bugs are caught in dev mode only before you deploy the code into production. Okay, now you see that it works fine. Okay, so even if it is rendering two times, this thing is working fine. Again, we created a deep copy. Even if we create a shallow copy, then also the problem will be fixed, which means that you will do something like this. Now again, items is an array, right? Now if we take the values of those arrays, spread it and create a new thing, then this thing is not this thing, right? If we directly operate on items, then that is directly reference, right? But right now we are operating on a separate shallow copy, so this will also work fine. So you can see this is also working fine, right? But the best way is to directly do it here only. So you understand, unnecessarily we are creating a separate variable, right, and then pushing it, pushing the task in it. Okay, so why not directly do something like this? So it is sort of a shallow copy only, but that thing is directly done here, something like this. So we spread items, okay, and then we spread items and then add tasks to it. So let's see. Okay, so now it is working fine. Okay, so now it works. Just one thing, that first thing is that this every time I add, this remains, this should be cleared up. Second thing is that initially it's good to have some placeholder here, right? So let's see how can we achieve that. So that placeholder is straightforward. Here in input you can simply write a placeholder, and that placeholder can be any value. So let's say your task here, something like that. Okay, so now this is there, and then we can add whatever task we want. But now this is not getting cleared, right? Every time I'm adding, this is not getting cleared. It should be cleaned up. Okay, so in order to do that, what we can do is that we can take this value and set it to empty as soon as this set state is done. So you can see that task 1, so it is cleared, task 2, it is cleared. But you see, just now I said as soon as set state is done, but you know that set state is asynchronous. So when we reach this line, then it is not guaranteed that set state is done. Set state is asynchronous, it can run after some time. So how it is guaranteed that still this thing will work? So it will work because the task value we have assigned to a separate variable, and then that task value is captured inside this callback, and even if later it will be run, but that task value is already present here, right? So if we would set it, so if we would do something like this, let's say something like this, if we would do, then it might work, it might not work, right? Because now when this set state is running later, at that point of time it is taking the taking the value from this thing, and by that time when this thing is running, before that only if this thing is run, then by that time this will be empty. Okay, so essentially empty string will be added. Okay, so if in that sort of race conditions you can see that this thing is happening. But if we do like this, then obviously there is not a issue, because the task value is already captured and that will be used later. Okay, so this works fine. Now clear input is done. However, still one issue is there. So you can see that, yeah, task one you can add, that is fine. But let's say I don't write anything and just click on add task, then also it is like adding something like empty string, right? That should not happen, right? So what is the fix? What we can do is that if this thing is empty string, then we will not go ahead and do this sort of add task thing. Okay, so what we will do is that if task is there, then only we are going ahead and doing this, otherwise we are not doing this. Okay, so you can see that now if something is there, then only it is added, otherwise nothing is happening unless something is there. Okay, so now we have fixed that problem also. Now one important thing is there, that yeah, from user point of view, if you write something and then let's say I don't want to click on add task, I simply want to enter, but even if you press enter, then also it should work, like by the general UI design, how it should be done in a website. But generally you can see that it is not working. Why it is not working? In order to make that work, what we have to do is that this sort of isolated input and isolated button should not be there. We have to make a form from it, so that in form we know that inside form, when a submit button is there, submit button is the button is by default submit, or you can use input type submit, anything. Both of them will act as a submit button, and in a submit button inside a form, automatically that submit behavior will be there, right? So we can utilize that. So what we are going to do, we are going to have form element, and we'll move everything like this inside the form. Okay, after that what we're going to do is that instead of calling add task here, automatically whenever either you click or you enter, whatever you do, this on submit of this will be called, okay. So this looks fine, right? However, if you execute this and do something like this and press enter, then you can see that the page just refreshed and this question mark happened. So you know why this happened, because actually the form submitted on the same URL itself, that I don't want, right? So in order to avoid that, what we want, we need to when we call this add task, then we need to prevent the default behavior. What is the default behavior of the form? To submit on the same page, and it will refresh it, right? So whatever the default behavior is there, we need to prevent it. So for that we need to do prevent default. Okay, now if we do this, then you can see that everything is working fine. So right now I'm not clicking on add task, simply press enter and it is added. Okay, so now submit on enter is also working. Okay, this looks fine. However, if you remember that we earlier said that this sort of behavior where I'm using I as the key, that should not happen, right? So in order to fix that, what should ideally happen is that this data, this items, this thing, so right now what is happening? Right now each of the items is just a thing like this, task one. It's like this, right? it should not be like this. Rather, it should be having its own ID, which means that rather than simply a string, it should be a JSON object where it can be something like ID1, okay, and it can have let's say title, like this, okay. So this should be the ideal behavior. If we are having something like this, then some things needs to change, okay. Wherever we are using items, we will have to be careful that now items items is not directly an array of strings. Rather items is an array of objects where inside that object title is actually the task that we should be aware, right? So we will fix this, but firstly let's go here and we'll see that now item dot title is actually the thing, and in here we don't need index anymore. Rather I will simply use item dot id, okay. So now you'll see that it works, but we also need to fix our add task functionality, where whatever the current tasks are there, that is fine, but this new task, whatever the thing is we are getting, this should not be like normal string. This is simply a string, right? But this is an array of objects, so this should be something like this, where there should be some ID and we will see what it will be, but for the time being it should be title task, and let's see what is the ID. So what we can do is that simply, let's say the ID is starting I don't know, so let's say ID is starting with 0, then we can simply say that my new ID is whatever the current items dot length is there, current items dot length is there, length is there, that should work, right? So initially let's say it is having length 1, right? Then the ID was, this was 0 and this will be 1, okay. Later and for that matter you can simply print also this dot state dot items to see exactly what is happening. This dot state dot items, so you can see that initially length is 1 and there's only one item, this thing. As soon as you add something more, let's say like this, then the second task is there, that is fine. And how it worked, because my earlier length 1 was there. What was the earlier length? 1, and that's why I added that 1, because the index is starting from 0. And now it depends on your data, right? Let's say we saw that in JSON placeholder some time ago, we saw that something like this data is there, right? Where this is also a list of to-dos where the ID is starting from 1 rather than 0. Then it depends, like how do you want to set up. So if it is starting from 1, then this should be +1. So you can understand that. And now this ID is 1, so whenever you are adding anything, then your next ID is 2 rather than 1, okay. So that is fine. So now you have added some ID and this is working fine. However, let's also have some field, like in this JSON data we saw that there is a field called completed, which is a boolean value, and it says that whether this task is completed or not, okay. So we can have something like completed false, okay. And then what we can do, and anything which is added new, then that will be obviously, just now it is added so it cannot be completed, that's why it will be completed false. But maybe later so let's do something like this. So let's say task 1 2 3 ID is 1 2 3, let's say, okay. Then you can see that this is like this, okay. we don't need to print this for now. So you can see that this task 1 to 3 is there. But what if we want to have a behavior like if this thing, so right now whatever the title item dot title is there, right? Similarly, now item dot completed will also be available here. Okay, so what if we want to style it in a different manner depending on whether the thing is completed or not? So just I'm giving you an example. So you can do something like this, that let's say you can say that uh, you can say something like this, that if item dot completed, okay, if this is the case, then you can do something else, otherwise you can do something else. So for example, let's say if it is not completed, then you are having, let's say inside some span, you can have a normal you can have some normal okay. So let's see something like this. So what I'm saying, that if it is completed, we can add it in del tag. Del tag is basically delete tag, which will behave like crossed out, like it will be crossed out, right? So you can see that right now everything is not completed, and that's why they are like this. Let's say one of them is completed, then you will have something like this. Whatever is completed, that is striked. But isn't that a bad thing? What should ideally happen is that I should have some sort of input thing, so that I can check mark whether this should be whether this should be whether this should be uh, checked or not, right? Completed or not, right? So in order to do that, what we can do is that let's start with false only, but we should be able to control that, right? So in order to do that, what we can do is that we can write some here inside the li item, we can add some input. Let's say type should be checkbox, something like this. Okay, and let's put some space here, and let's try to remove this thing. So this li, yeah, so what we can do is that here you can say li list style none. Okay, so this looks fine. Now my target should be that, yeah, as soon as I keep on adding things, so that will keep on adding. But when I click on something, then let's say it is done, then it should be checked, like deleted, like sort of strike out. Okay, so in order to do that, what we can do is that we can create a on change function on this. Okay, and let's see, so on change, and we can create a function called, let's say, this dot handle checked. Okay, now this dot handle checked. Okay, so now I can implement this handle checked function, and essentially it will get an event. But more importantly, let's see what is event dot target dot checked. So you'll see that when I click, then I get true. Okay, when I click again, then I get false. Okay, that is one thing. So true false we have got. Okay, okay, that looks fine. Apart from that, what if I also get the actual ID. Okay, that I can do something like this, that let's say I add name is equal to, and in that name I will add item dot ID. Okay, and then if I print event dot target dot name, then I'll get that task 1 is true, task 1 is false, task 3 is true, task 2 is true. So I'm getting the actual ID also. Apart from that, I'm getting the value also, which is getting true and false. Okay, so I'm trying to create a situation where can I on the fly change this. So what is the whole thing I want to do? I want to do something like this. Obviously this dot set state, I want to do something like this, but with a difference. Okay, what is the difference? The difference I want to do here is that first of all, this whole thing, I will obviously take the item current items, spread it, right? But after that I am I will try to see the actual item. So here in this case, I'll try to get actual item. So const item is equal to items dot find. What is find? You know that items dot on an array, if I try to do this thing called find, then whatever the, let's say, object is there, that on that object I can write a condition. So let's say that object dot id, if that is equal to my my event dot target dot name, we know that in the name I will get that id, right? Okay, and then let's print that out. Okay, and right now let's say I'm not doing anything. Let's say right now I'm not doing anything, so let's take it out as it is, whatever the earlier. So this means that I'm not doing anything, whatever was earlier, right now also it is earlier, right? Same thing, right? But let's see that what it gives us. So if I click on task 2, I'm getting undefined. Yeah, so that might be because you see, even on target dot name, this thing is whatever being passed, that is fine, but that is that will be, even if you're passing it as a like number, but this thing it will eventually become a string when you're getting it from the target. But o dot id is still a number. Okay, so string and number, even if let's say both are 2 2, that they will not match. So if you, instead of double triple equal to, if you use double equal to, then what will happen is that now you are getting task 2, because now that is matching, right? But you should not use double equal to, you should use triple equal to. Double equal to, you can understand that 2 number and 2 string, both they will match, but we don't want to do that. So rather you can convert this to a proper string, something like this, right? And then you'll see that now also it works, right? However, the more better thing would have been to have IDs as a string in the first place itself. So let's say that when IDs were declared, it should have been like string only rather than number. Okay, and here also when new ID is created, there's like okay, firstly see in the data how it is given. So here they have given as numbers, right? So okay, then we'll keep it as so in our case you'll see that if we do something like this, then also it will work. You'll see that now also it works, but yeah, so later we'll incorporate that fixed JSON data also. So let's keep it in this format only, and let's change it here rather. See, ID should be a string, but let's say in key here, even if you use a number, automatically that will be converted to string, and then that string will be used as key. So that's not an issue. Okay, but in this case we will see that we will get the proper item. So in this case, since I have converted to string, now we are getting this task 3. Okay, so now what is the idea? The idea is that I have got this now. If it is check marked, then I need to set completed as false. Okay, that is the thing I want to do. Okay, so since whenever we are getting a particular item, that item is what? That item is basically a JSON, like this thing, right? Not JSON, this JavaScript object which we are getting, right? Now this JavaScript object which we are getting, what are we getting essentially? We are just finding items.find. This array.find will not return a copy, rather it will return just that object itself, which means that we are getting a reference of itself, of that object itself, which means that if we are clicking on 2, then we are getting that particular here whatever is there, that reference I'm getting. So we can directly modify that, and that will be directly visible. Okay, and then we can do a set state. Okay, so yeah, so let's do something like this. If event.target.checked, if event.target.checked, if this thing is true, okay, then what we are going to do, we are going to do this item dot completed is equal to, this is checked, right? So this is completed. Otherwise you can simply say that it is not completed. Okay, and then we can simply return the items, and now this console log is not needed, this is also not needed. Let's see, so if I click on 2, this is crossed out, 3 crossed out, I again click on this, and this is unchecked. Okay, so now you might be thinking that, yeah, so why this return thing is needed if you are just returning the item? See, I have just modified something inside state, right? But until unless I uh, let's say I do this logic whole thing, I could have done whole logic outside this dot set state also, right? But then the component will not re-render. Okay, so this internally, if you have mutated something, then React will not know that it has to re-render. Okay, so even if you return simply items and internally you have changed, so my point is that this thing, set state and returning something, is important because you have modified something. Until unless this dot set state is encountered, React will not re-render it, right? So that is important. Okay, so now that we have seen that this sort of thing is working, and then if we add a new thing, then obviously this works on that also. And again, if you want to have a different behavior, that let's say rather than this, you want to have some sort of behavior where if you check, then it's completely deleted, removed altogether, then you can do the same thing, like you are using id or using a particular id. Since you are doing this thing, you could also search in the array that where is that id, and then you can delete that also, right? So those things you can do, but the main idea is that this sort of to-do list can be very easily made. As you can see that even if we are doing some complicated logic, it is very easy to do in React, because in React all we need to do is that we just need to manage state. Rather than, you see that here the logic remains same, right? Thus just there is a map of there is a state. Okay, it's items, and we are just creating this sort of JSX elements by looping on it. Apart from that, how this is rendered, that is React's problem. Our problem is only that how we should maintain the state and make it keep it consistent across all the functionalities. Whenever we want to do something, we have to manage our state properly. Once we manage state properly, everything else will take care of itself. That will be taken care by React. Okay, So now we have seen that how to do this is essentially the handling of ID and the handling of the completed flag, etc. Now the main thing is that whatever the thing which we did just now is that we added this thing in the beginning itself, right? So earlier I told you that this thing was, let's say, empty. This thing was empty, right? And we wanted that, yeah, something like started from here, right? But what we could have done is that we could have done the same thing in component did mount also. So let's say in component did mount, we are using a this dot set state, okay, and in that we are using this, we are doing this thing. So where we are doing um, items. So let's say, let's have something like this: const items is equal to this thing. This thing means essentially an array like this, and then we simply do something like this, okay. So this will also work because initially it was empty. If we don't do something like this, then it will remain empty. But in component did mount, if we did something like this, then it started with that initial set of values. Now most importantly, we are hard coding this, right? But we could also get this from some API. And as we discussed earlier, that we already have a fake JSON API or something like this, right? Then exactly you can see that the same format is there. There is an array of objects. This is also an array of objects. It has ID, title, and completed, which are number, string, and boolean respectively. So ID, title, and completed. Here also you can see that ID, title, and completed is there, and number, string, and boolean is there. So exactly if we simply get this data using fetch API and then set it, we will get exactly the same behavior. So now let's do that. So we are going to use async await. So const rest is equal to await fetch. Okay, since we are using await, we have to use async here. And then other than this, we'll see that we are going to create items from here. So simply const yeah, items is equal to await rest dot json. Okay, and you can see that we have got the data. So we have already got the data from here, and whatever is like already let's say this one is completed, then you can see that here that one is completed. So whatever is completed, that is already crossed. Okay, and again you can handle this little thing that whenever this is crossed, then it should be initialized. You can understand that when item is completed, then this input value should be like initialized with that. So this is what, if this thing is true, if this thing is item dot completed is true, then this should be checked. If it is false, it is not completed, then checked should also be not false, right? So you can use a similar thing like something like I don't know, this is on change name. Okay, then you can also have a value here. Okay, value, no, not value, so checked is equal to this thing, item dot completed. So now you can have this sort of behavior where whatever is already done, that is. So these sort of small things you can do, but the idea is that everything works as it is. In fact, if you add some new things, so let's say buy milk, you can see that all these things, anything which you are adding, that is also being added, and you can also work on that also. So the point is that this is a brief introduction where you can use React to do somewhat meaningful things, and then yeah, you can start from here and play around and add a little bit of your imagination and try to do something more with it. So that should be fine. So yeah, that will be all for this video. See you in the next one.